Welcome to AngularJS controllers tutorial. In this tutorial, we'll go through what are controllers and how to define AngularJS controllers, and also we would see how dependencies can be used within controllers. So what are controllers? Controllers in AngularJS are just JavaScript functions. These actually act as basic building blocks for any Angular application. And controllers actually create a framework to promote code reusability and testability. And these JavaScript functions are used to create a new Angular scope context, which is actually bounded to specific sections of the HTML markup. And overall, the controller provides a place to put application and view logic, which is actually specific to a particular set of HTML tags. So for a single view, we can actually use multiple controllers. And similarly, it's also possible to reuse a controller in different views as well. So let's quickly go through the syntax of a simple controller. So here you could actually see the first line actually creates an Angular module. A module is just a logical unit within Angular application, and this can actually contain one or more controllers, services, filters, and directives, etc. within it. And in this particular example, we are actually creating a new module called app with this angular.module call. And here app can be considered as the entire Angular application. So the overall function signature represents two arguments, whereas the first argument actually stands for the module name. The second argument actually stands for a string array of dependencies. So a dependency is a reference to module to a different module which can be used in order to let the current module function properly. And Angular will ensure that every module which is actually listed in this dependency list is loaded even before creating this app module. And in this particular simple example, as we don't need any dependencies, we could just pass an empty array as shown in the first line. So coming to the second line, it's the app.controller, which actually lets us add a controller object to this module. And just similar to the module function, the first argument even here would correspond to the controller name. And the second argument is actually a list which contains all dependencies along with a function as the last element in the array. So the function is actually the place where the controller logic is actually present. And so you could actually see one particular item before the function $scope, which is the dependency this particular controller needs. And $scope is the local scope context that every controller actually has. And looking at the function signature, you could also see that we can understand that we'll have access to a $scope variable. And when this main controller is actually created, Angular will execute this particular function with a new $scope object because this is listed as a dependency to this controller function. While the function arguments can be renamed, it's to any shorter notation. It is generally preferred to actually keep the function argument and the dependency name the same for readability sake. So this is how a basic controller can be defined. And let's quickly go through the dependencies. So here the dependency is the $scope, which is actually a child scope object, and whose parent is the global application scope. And these are just automatically created by Angular when a controller is actually specified with ng-controller directive in HTML. So Angular actually has a built-in dependency injection system. And dependency injection is actually a design pattern where dependencies are injected into a dependent object when it's created, and it becomes part of the client object state. So this would actually separate the client and dependency logic and further decouples the client from the dependency. So in this case, the dependent object you could actually see here is the main controller, and the $scope is the dependency. And even if there are any additional dependencies, even those can be similarly injected into the controller. and thus the controller would not be responsible for finding and creating those dependencies. Instead, those are just passed as parameters. So we could actually go through a quick example. Okay. So here you could actually see we already included a script tag which actually loads the AngularJS library. And in this example, the HTML element is actually taking ng-app attribute a value, say my app. So this is the same name with which we wanted to access the angular.module call also. So here in the script tag, you could actually see in the angular.module call, we are actually referring to the my app, the application name, and we are not passing any dependencies within the list. So we are just passing an empty array here. And in the app.controller call, here we are naming it as to be main as the controller name. And the ng-controller main here in the body tag is a declaration which we just discussed to have it automatically created in Angular. So here scope is the only dependency which is being injected into the controller, and all the logic what we have in this particular simple example is to just have a person's variable within the scope context, and this particularly takes two JavaScript objects, and the first JavaScript object takes the first name to be John and last name as Adams, and similarly the second object would actually take the first name William and the last name Johnson. So in order to test this, we actually added a simple development here. So this simple element actually refers to a AngularJS directive ng-repeat. So this particular directive actually lets Angular to iterate through the entire collection. And in this expression, as you see, we are actually trying to access the persons variable. So this actually persons is a collection, and we are trying to iterate through this entire collection. And the handle which we have here is the person, and we are trying to represent the person dot first name within the AngularJS expression here, followed with a space, and similarly the person dot last name here in braces. So this ng-repeat directive would actually would actually iterate through all the objects in that collection and render the first name and last name as we are placing it here. So let's quickly see how this gets loaded in browser. Okay, so now you could see as we were expecting, it's iterating through the all the objects in the collection and displaying the first name space last name for the two objects which are present. And if you further wanted to inspect this creation, you could actually see how the ng-repeat directive actually created multiple developments. In our example, we just had two objects in the collection. So we have just two developments which are created, one corresponding to the John Adams and the second one corresponding to the William Johnson. So with this, we actually covered how to create a basic controller, and thanks for watching.